series today, and it's a series, as you saw up there, just called the Echoes of the Prophets. And so we're just going to take the prophets, some of the prophets, over the next several weeks, and we're just going to look at them as their character, but also as the lessons they taught, because I believe there is so much within the Old Testament that we miss because I failed to teach it. And so we're going to make a change there. We're going to start teaching from the Old Testament because there is so much there to get. And so that's where we're going this morning. And we're going to start with the most famous prophet in the Old Testament. Close your minds. Picture with me a gentleman about 5'5" walking down a dirt path. He's in his bib overalls. He's got steel-toed sandals on. He's got his robe. He's got calluses all over his hands. But he also has a righteous anger in his heart. His name, Amos. How many of you even know where Amos is in the Bible? I am so glad I have this, because I can just type in Amos and it finds it for me. Right? Amos is not one of those big books. Let me ask you, how many people do you know that are Amos? Right? How about those of you of my generation and older? Remember a TV series called The Real McCoys? You remember that? Grandpa's name was Amos. He was Amos. And the only other Amos I could think of is a famous Amos. Do you know who famous Amos is? If you get a sweet tooth, you know. It's famous Amos cookies. There's not a lot of Amoses around. But this one in the Old Testament is one we're going to learn about today. And I think before we leave today, he will be a famous Amos. He hailed from this dusty little town called Tekoa. It was 6 miles southeast of Bethlehem, and it was on the edge of the Judean Badlands where all the robbers hang out. And that's where this little town was. So I want you to grab your Bible, and I want you to turn it, whether you have the physical Bible or your electronic device, to the book of Amos. And we're going to just be in the book of Amos. Very short book, so we'll just flip through some pages there. But that's where we're going to be. And if you're looking for it, it's after Daniel and Hosea and Joel and then Amos. So it's back in the back a ways. But listen, it's not one of the more familiar books, is it? How many of you opened up Amos this morning for your devotion time? Not me. I don't think many people do. We just don't look at it. It's not familiar. We don't memorize a lot from it. But we need to turn to it this morning and just hold that. Because I believe it has some great lessons for us today as believers. And I want to encourage you, if you've not read the book of Amos, go home this week and just read the book of Amos. And I think you'll be surprised at what you find. The year, 760 BC. About 100 years after the ministry of Elijah and Elisha, the nation of Israel had been divided now for about 160 years. It was about 200 years before the glory days of David and Solomon. But these are the days in Israel of sin and corruption. And Israel had been now divided into two kingdoms. The northern kingdom, called Israel. The southern kingdom, called Judah. Now, if your memory is good, then you'll remember that King Jeroboam in the north, he set up 2 golden calves. They were idols. So the people could worship there in the north instead of going south to Jerusalem to worship in the temple of the Creator, Yahweh. The kings of the north were all pretty much evil. Years later, there was a king that came along. His name was Ahab, and instead of just worshiping there, instead of going to Jerusalem, he set up idol worship. He wanted people to worship Baal and Ashtaroth. He wanted to do that kind of worship in the temples they had in the north. Temples involving mutilation. Temples inviting premarital sex and extramarital sex and all types of perversions was what they were calling worship. So Mr. Amos, he was a southerner. Now there is in the scriptures, this verse that says a prophet has no honor in his own country. Are you familiar with that? Well, this is the case that God honored that because he took a prophet from the south in Judah, he took him out of his own country and he sent him north to teach the people in the northern kingdom. So he left his own. He was a missionary. That's what he was. He was a missionary. He was a preacher by calling. I want you to catch this. He was a preacher by calling, but he didn't earn his living by preaching. On the occupation line, on his 1040, he listed nurseryman or sheep breeder. Or maybe he tended fig trees. He tended these fig trees. He was taking the fruit off so the rest of the fruit could ripen quicker. But he also had a livestock business. And this is all in the hills of Tekoa, where it wasn't always safe. But here's what you got to hear. Amos was not a professional clergy. He was not a professional priest. Now, however, you got to remember that we are. We are priests. Tekoa, he didn't have a master's of divinity hanging on his wall. But let me tell you what Amos did have. Amos had a devotion for God. A complete devotion to God. And he had a passion for justice. He had a keen sense of right and what's wrong. He had what we would call today a biblical worldview. When you start to read the book of Amos, you'll find that his red-hot fervor, as I call it, just flies off of the pages. It's like when you hit an anvil with a hammer and the sparks just fly. That was Amos. Amos chapter 1 and verse 2. Let's just see the fervor that he has. I love this. He said, the Lord roars. He didn't say the Lord speaks or the Lord talks or the Lord just gives us a little hint. He didn't whisper. He roars from Zion and he thunders from Jerusalem. The pastures of the shepherds dry up and the top of Carmel withers. And so what he does from that point, he's just saying, hey, the Lord's roaring out. And then he starts listing all of these sins of these pagan nations that are around Israel. All these pagan nations, Edom, the Ammonites and Moabites, the Edomites, all the other Gentile countries that were all around. And as he's doing this, I can just see this group of Jews around behind him just got their fist up. You know, they're pumping it because look what he's getting to them. He's letting them have it. He's giving them what they deserve. And then, let's just say that he lands a sucker punch. And that sucker punch is at the nation of Israel. He starts swinging at the people that are behind him. You know, I never like to preach when there's a choir behind me because you never know what they were doing to you. I think the same thing's happening here. Amos didn't like this choir that was behind him that was cheering him on because he turns around now and he starts talking to them. And I think Amos, when he hit them, he knocked them senseless with the stinging combination of punches. He accused them, you're idol worshipers. You're commandment breakers. You're tramplers of God's wall. And I just got this visual in my mind that as the Jews are picking themselves up from the mat, they're catching their breath. And Amos draws them, he pulls them back in the ring. They're trying to crawl out of the ring, but Amos is pulling them. You ever watch WWE? Yeah, where they think they're getting out and they're crawling out of the ring, but no, you pull them back in the ring. That's what Amos is doing. He's pulling them back in the ring. And then he starts to blast them. He charges them with being greedy, with bribery, with oppression, with tabloid sleaze. And then he lands the knockout punch, the Mike Tyson punch. Only took one. And this is what it says, and this is God speaking directly through him. Now then, I will crush you as a cart crushes when loaded with grain. The swift will not escape, the strong will not muster their strength, and the warrior will not save his life. That's chapter 2, verses 13 and 14. If you're standing as one of those groups that were cheering, and then he throws these punches at you, what's your response? Folks, those are very hard words to hear. They're very serious charges. It's an indictment that made the people want to cover their ears, and they wanted to muzzle that country bumpkin prophet. As a matter of fact, Amaziah, he was the king's chaplain. He spoke for the king, and he tried to do just that. He tried to muzzle Amos, but he couldn't. And so Amaziah walks up to Amos like he's a bull in a china shop, and he's going to let him have it. And he gives him these words in Amos chapter 7, verses 12 and 13. Get out of here, you seer. Go back to the land of Judah. Earn your bread there, and do your prophesying there. Don't prophesy anymore in Bethel, because this is the king's sanctuary and the temple of the kingdom. Oh, he was going to let him have it, wasn't he? You can't tell us what to do. You're from that kingdom down south. Go back down to Georgia where you belong. Can I just tell you, it is very hard to be a prophet or a priest today. And every one of you sitting there, and me up here, we are all priests according to Scripture. We are priests. So hear me, please. It's not going to be easy, the things that we need to do, but they still need to be done. And that's what was going on with Amos. And we need to be like Amos, because listen, this is the easiest way to put it. Amos did not shut up. He kept going. And as a matter of fact, he didn't even soften his words. How could he? He looked around and he saw that the Israelites, listen to what the scripture says, sell the righteous silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. They trample on the heads of the poor and upon the dust of the ground and deny justice to the oppressed. And that's found in chapter 2, verses 6 and 7. The people of the north, the people of the kingdom of Israel, they thought that they were experiencing the golden age. You ever hear people talk about the golden age here? Yeah, especially the golden age of movies, things of that nature. We were at a trustees meeting down to school down at Kentucky Christian this past weekend, and a friend of mine who is an absolute nut looked at me and he started talking about the things of the past. You know, the rotary dial phones, the cars that had carburetors on them. And he just started going, and he says, and they think that was the good old days. And he looked at me and he said, isn't this the good old days? And I think it is. I think where we're living today is the good old days. It's what we need. But we need to be like Amos. We need to be like Amos. This is, let's face it, this is a golden age right now that we're in. Think about it. The stock market's up, interest rates down. The pursuit of the almighty shekel ranks atop. We don't pursue justice and righteousness. I want to tell you, it's very similar to us in the 90s. Housing starts were red hot. Israelites wouldn't impress their neighbors because they would build a summer house and a winter house, and they would furnish it and inlaid ivory. I really like, as you read through, you read about the women of Bashan in Samaria. They took pampering to new heights. They were sprawled out on their chaste loungers, and they were calling on their husbands to bring them cocktails. Notice it wasn't the men calling the women to bring cocktails. But I got to tell you, Amos, I love his way of just addressing issues, because he speaks of these women, Bashan, and he uses poetic charm, and he just kind of sums it up, and he calls these women cows. Cows. But the thing that really got him, and I think the thing that gets most of us as well, if we're honest with ourselves, this is something that just reaches into the core of our being, and it's that they practice two-faced religion. That's what got him. They practiced two-faced religion. On one hand, they bragged about their giving, about giving offerings on top of their tithes, right? They took pride in their liturgically correct worship services. But the other face was practicing gross idolatry. They were worshiping golden calves. They were engaging in temple prostitution and tolerating unbiblical priesthood. In my mind, I just envision Amos cringing. And I get to just see his face getting redder and redder as his face mounted. You ever see anybody like that? You ever experienced that with someone? Okay, then gentlemen, you haven't lied to your wife. If you're not honest with your wife, I guarantee you that it's going to rise. That red's going to come, and there's going to be steam coming out the top. I think that's what's happening with Amos here. He's cringing. He's getting red-faced. I picture him just like what Jesus was when he entered the temple and he found those money changers. And before he started flipping tables and taking those money changers and driving them out, I picture his face being blood red because he was so angry. But it was a righteous anger that he had. And when Amos did this, he opened his mouth and out came the judgment of God. Look at Amos chapter 5, verses 21 to 24. I despise your religious feast. I cannot stand your assemblies. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to your music of your harps, but let justice roll like a river and righteousness like a never-ending stream. Can you imagine receiving that word from God this morning? I think we have some wonderful songs in worship. I believe that Derek and the worship team always does a wonderful job. But can you imagine God saying, no, I'm not going to listen to that because there's too many people sitting out there this morning that are worshiping me two-faced. Simple question. Are you the same Monday morning as you are Sunday morning? Or do you become a different person? That's a choice that all of us make. And God was talking to the people of Israel, the children of Israel right here, but that's no different than talking to us. Are we being the disciples that God has called us to be? Are we being honest with ourselves and with others on Monday, the same as we are with each other on Sunday? Let me tell you what the foundation of the sin in the nation of Israel, I'm going to tell you, it's no different than the foundation of the sin today. Money. Actually, let me be a little more to the point here. It's greed. It's the love of money. Money is not the root of all evil, folks. The love of it is. And we see that. I just want to fast forward 2,800 years. I want to skip over a couple continents. I want to go over this big ocean. And I'm just going to say that America today sounds very much like Israel 2,800 years ago, doesn't it? There's not a lot of difference there. We're the same as they were. We define success today with dollar signs instead of service and sacrifice. We define the American dream not as giving, but as having. We got to own one house. No, we got to own two houses. We got to own two cars. No, we got to have three cars or four cars. But I'm going to tell you what, this pursuit, this greed that has consumed us has come at a ridiculous price. According to most reliable sources, the average American household owes around $10,000 in credit card debt. Can you fathom that? $10,000? Woo! Well, but the bankruptcy lawyers will tell you that no, it's not $10,000. It's $25,000 that people are in the hole. Folks, what's happened to our priorities? You know, the typical high school couple spends more on their prom than the average of the American household gives to charity every year. Beer sales in the United States outrank tea, water, and powdered drink sales combined. Every year, the average teen spends 900 hours in school, 1,500 hours watching TV. Listen, those kids watching all that TV, as well as us, we can quote commercial after commercial after commercial, but very seldom can we sit down and quote the Ten Commandments, the Beatitudes. But we know all the other. We're living right now in a relative peaceful time. And we live in a time of prosperity in this country. But over the past several years, giving to the church has plummeted. For the most part, 2%. People give 2% of their annual income to the church. Scripture wants us to give a minimum of 10%. But even more sad is the fact that only 6% of people that regularly attend church give at all. 6%. Do you know what I'm so thankful for? Those numbers don't apply to this church. We have phenomenal givers in this church. We have people whose hearts show where their love is. Their treasure shows where their heart is. We know that we have people that love this church dearly. And you exemplify it through your giving. You're not like those that the national averages show us. Now, I'm not in any way, shape, or form trying to make us feel bad. I just want to make us aware. I want to make us aware that God's people, you and I, have never been called to put our heads in the sand. We've never been called to be an ostrich. The word church and the word apathy do not belong in the same sentence. Think about it for a moment. Our ancestors understood this because they fought to end slavery. They championed temperance. They worked to improve prison conditions. They built clinics, schools, orphanages. They helped abolish child labor. Listen, this guy named John Wesley, some of you may have heard of him. John Wesley lived so frugally at the end of his life that he was giving 98% of his money to the poor. I'm saying all this because it's so easy for you and I to sit in here and to look out those beautifully cleaned windows and see that world out there and be the Jews back here that are, yay. And we can name all the sins that are all around us out there. But I don't know there's one of us in here that can look in the mirror and see Jesus completely. I look in the mirror every morning, and it's not a pretty sight. But nor can I see the completeness, the full body, the face of Jesus, because I fall short. And I believe that all of us in here do. So I want us to look around. Look around. Where do you see the greatest need in the church? Where's the greatest need? Maybe at the school your kids attend. Maybe it's just the community at large, but where do you see the greatest need? And when you see that greatest need, stop. Get on your knees and listen. Be still and know that he is God. And then you just ask the question, God, what are you calling me to do? How is he pricking your heart to make a difference in the lives of people? Sit down and assess yourself. What skills, talents, and interest, abilities has the Lord given me to serve him? To serve the world that he loved so much that he gave his one and only Son for any and everyone who would believe in him. I'll be very honest this morning. As you're sitting here, many of you are thinking the same thing that I think. What in the world do I have to give? I don't have anything to give. And the truth of the matter is, you may not have a lot to give. But what did God do with 5 loaves and 2 fish? What did he do with that? That's the same thing he'll do with whatever gift and talent you offer him. He will multiply it. He will bless it. He will spread the efforts that you make. But you've got to make the effort. You know, I like this. Superman fought a never-ending battle for truth, justice, and the American way. We believers, we Christians, we fight a battle for truth, justice, and God's way. See, the ancient words of Amos will never go out of date. Back to Amos 5:24. But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. God never called us to be perfect. He never called us to give an amount that's above what we can give. And I mean time, talent, and treasure. He's only asked you to offer him what you have to give him. He takes it in his hand. And then he decides how he's going to bless it, multiply it, and pass it on to others. Today, be Amos. Become a famous Amos. And do what you can do for God and watch what he will do to bless others. And in blessing others, he strengthens your faith. Giving what he's given us to give. Sharing with what he's given us to share. And let him do what only he can do.